Welcome to Lumar. This is Better Link Building Strategies for SEO. And if we could go to the next slide, let's get a little housekeeping done.
Let me X out. I'm like absorbed in the chat. All right, there we go.
No, you're good. All right, so I do want to start off and say that we do have closed captioning, so it is enabled. You can go ahead and click it in the bottom menu of your Zoom. You can do show captions. You can also do view live transcript. And there, we are going to record, or we are recording, I should say, this webinar, and we will have full subtitles included, so look out for that. You will get an email about it, and then you can watch on your own time as well, and share it, and it will have that transcript available. All right, so hello and welcome. Let's start out with the wonderful Amanda, head of marketing at Stacker Studio. Did you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you all for coming. My name is Amanda. I've been in the content SEO link world for about 10 years now, mostly agency side, but I've worked with so many different clients as a result, so many different companies. And as you'll see very soon, I can talk endlessly about this. So that I'm glad that there's like, a time stop. But if you ever have any questions or want to chat, I would love that afterwards. You can add me on LinkedIn or Twitter or anything along those lines, and I'm happy to talk even more.
And I'm Emily Whalen. I'm a technical SEO here with the professional services team at Lumar. And I'm hosting today. So I'm super excited to get this started for you all because I know backlinks has always been a little bit of a stressor for me. So let's get started. Final housekeeping notes. So this is our agenda for today. We've got, like I said, a little housekeeping, the state of backlinks for SEO in 2023, paid versus earned links, how to get high quality earned links. And of course, we're going to round out the end with questions and answers. But if you have questions go ahead and pop those in the question and answer section, and I will be sure to ask those of Amanda. There you go. See, I'm ahead of myself. We also are going to have a survey at the end of this that we're going to send out to you. It's less than 1 minute to complete. It really does help us find some ideas and focus for future. So please go ahead and check that out. And then this will, again, be on demand. We will share it in a few days. So you'll be able to watch that if for some reason something comes up today. All right, so we also are going to start with a poll question today. Let's be a little interactive. So let me know, have you ever paid for backlinks? Is it yes? Is it no? Is it I don't know?
Or you don't want to admit.
Right? I don't want to say.
It's anonymous. It's anonymous. Don't worry about it. Yeah.
We won't judge. Ooh, someone said Wicked and Through the Woods, In the Heights. Oh, I love it.
Yeah, Wicked's another dear favorite of mine.
Oh, so good. All right, it looks like, so the majority of people, 59% say no, 39% say yes, and another 2% say they don't know. So let's get into this, and let's chat a little bit about the state of backlinks in 2023.
It's super interesting, like the number of people who have, and it's like, I totally get it. Backlinks are like the hardest part of SEO. And it's interesting because this stat was really intriguing to me in this survey of nearly 300 SEOs, that 94% think that Google will keep using links as a ranking signal. So it's like we all have this anxiety of knowing that it's going to continue to be pertinent. Mm-hmm. But it's also the hardest thing. I mean, that's honestly probably why it is pertinent, right? Because it's not the easiest thing to hack, and it's not easy to make happen quickly with little resources, right?
Exactly.
And this, Emily, you pulled this, and I think this is a really good quote from this post with Seer Interactive, which is, we're going to be talking a lot about this in this presentation, because a lot of this is like a mindset shift where the phrase has always been like building backlinks, and it almost feels like a game or a challenge. And it's like, how do we just get the links that we need for the site?
Right.
But what this quote kind of was referring to is, think about it more as like an authority building exercise, which is more why links are valued in the first place, right? They are a proxy for authority. Emily, would you agree with that?
I would. Yeah. I think that is, I come from nonprofit. I come from arts. That was my background before I got to Lumar. And, we couldn't pay for backlinks. That just wasn't in the budget. I think the marketing budget was me. So it was about creating that content and trying to access the community in ways that did build authority and say, here we are, this is who we are, please come visit us. So it's definitely a challenge.
Yeah, it absolutely is. So if anything, we commiserate, but we're going to talk about ways to hopefully make it a little easier. But before we do that, here's the second poll question, which is, do you think that backlinks still matter and will continue to matter? So as if you're taking the same poll that we just revealed the results of, where do you stand on it? This is actually something that I've seen a lot pop up on LinkedIn. A lot of debating on LinkedIn about this.
Yeah.
And what is going to be, especially in the world of AI, and God, that's like a whole other presentation, but what people think is going to become primary ranking factors.
All right.
Very interesting.
Very interesting. 70% say yes, 3% say no, and 27% say yes, but not as much as it once did.
Super interesting. I think that taking the authority approach is what's going to make it just as important because of all the other extra benefits that come from the authority building rather than focusing specifically on links. Because I agree, there's a lot of nuance to that conversation, right? About like the value of a link. Mm-hmm. And I think it has so much to do with the type of link and how you earned it and where it came from. All right, so let's get into it. We talked, we discussed a little bit about the importance of links. Now let's talk about paid versus earned links. And we alluded to that at the top, where we asked if you have paid for links at all. This is how I view paying for links. This amazing gif of Daenerys Targaryen from Game of Thrones saying, "I will take what is mine with fire and blood." Basically, the mentality of like building links or paying for links is like, I need it, I'm gonna get it. That's it. I know I have to have it for whether it's my goal to get a certain number of links, like I have to report up on this. If it's, I need to do anything I can to rank this page and I don't have like a ton of resources, whatever it is. This is kind of like the mentality I think comes with paying for links, whereas earning links is more this gift of like, I know my value. I am earning links because I know I have things to provide to readers, to publishers, to other sites, to other experts that actually demonstrates the expertise of our brand that will then lead to links. But there was that in between of providing value and thus earning the links. And I think that this mentality will remain valuable until the end of time, essentially, because no matter what that ranking factor is, Google or any search engine is ultimately trying to figure out who's the best to talk about this topic, which piece of content is best to address this topic. So to put it a different way, paying for links is focusing on the result and not really how you get there, right? It's just kind of like, I need the links, I don't really care. I mean, you probably care about like, you want the best quality for the amount of money, but other than that, it means ultimately you didn't really provide a ton of value to anybody. It was a transaction. And it typically leads to S3 results that don't meaningfully last. So I don't want to pretend that buying links can't boost a specific page in the short term, because that's why people do it. And I'm not going to, sit here and say things that aren't true. But I think that over time, when you skip the authority building part of the exercise and marketers and SEOs don't look at the long term, the growth will not sustain itself. Whereas earning links, you're focusing more on the value of the content that you're creating or the relationship that you're creating, whatever it is that is the means to the end of earning links. And you typically get better links when you do it this way. When you're earning, you're able to tap into sites and publishers that don't normally sell their links. you're able to build more trust and affinity from your audience, because if that link comes from an authoritative place that doesn't sell their links, that's a really good trust signal that you're getting back, right? So again, there's no judgment for paying for links. It's mostly why I personally advocate for earning in the long term and why it should be prioritized as a strategy. So if you buy a link, best case scenario, your page gets a boost, like I talked about. But if you earn one, you have a high authority link, a logo you can put on your site, a piece of content that lives on your site and then you can re-promote forever. And that is valuable forever. So that, I think, is like the really practical difference between the two. And as Leslie Knope is saying here, like, that is what I want. The other thing to note is that paying for links isn't really that scalable. You can use like the same vendor or the same PBN or whatever it is that you're doing, but you're going to just keep tapping into the same kind of like links over and over again. You know, you can boost a page, but you can't like boost your entire site doing this. Like, you're not going to be able to, you know, repeated links from low quality sites is not going to do you any favors. Whereas if you do it through earning links with newsworthy content, which we'll talk more about, we've actually found like our stories get 150 to 200 pickups per story, which paying for links, I mean, that if you pay for that many links through the same kind of network, it's just not the same amount of scalability or value there. So after talking about that, let's get into how you can do this, because I think everybody can kind of sit there and be like, yeah, that sounds great.
But
yeah, but what does that mean? And yeah, how exactly do we do that? So right. This is the meat of the presentation here. I'd already mentioned newsworthy content, and this is, I'm biased, so I'll admit that, because this is where my career has focused. My degree was in journalism, so from the very beginning, before I knew what SEO was or that it existed, I had the mindset of how do you create something that people want to read and that is important to share. So from an SEO perspective, newsworthy content has a lot of benefits. Because people care about that type of content, publishers and readers, it leads to a lot of high quality news pickups, which in turn leads to a lot of brand authority, and which in turn leads to top tier follow links, which again, that's a whole other presentation about follow versus no follow versus brand mentions versus whatever. We could talk about that later. But the reason why I advocate for newsworthy content is the content is so valuable that these things just inherently come along with it. I mentioned that my degree was in journalism. I feel like on day one, what they start drilling into are news values. So essentially, when you hear the word newsworthy, I realized I was doing this on presentations a lot. I was saying the word newsworthy. I was like, what the hell does that actually mean? Like, we know that it means worthy of news, but what does that actually mean? And it was interesting to me that news values were not ever like kind of shared online or like talked about from a PR, SEO, or marketing standpoint. So the way that I've kind of structured this presentation is with these top 3 news values. I have these other 2 on here because there are more news values than what I have here. These are the 5 I tend to mention the most. So really quickly, I'll run through them and I'll go more in depth about the first 3. Timeliness, I think, is the most obvious. This is what people think of when they hear about news. They think about like breaking news, meaning something's happening right now and reporters are responsible for telling you what is occurring, right? We're not, that is kind of like I think, the first thing people think about when they hear newsworthy. The second thing is proximity. And I feel that this is one of the most underutilized news values in terms of link-worthy content, in terms of trying to get a lot of buzz around a brand. As human beings, we care more about what's happening near us than what's happening far away. And it's just the reality. Like, if a street's closed in your neighborhood, you're going to care more about that than a street that's closed, 4 states over. Like, that doesn't mean anything to you. And we'll talk about how to apply that as well to content and link earning strategies. And then impact, which is also something that I think we think about as marketers and SEOs, but is extremely important when it comes to earning links, which is Impact is about how many people are being affected. So when you're trying to earn media coverage or get really high quality links and they have more general audiences, this is extremely important. You can't be speaking the niche language for this specific purpose. Quickly, some of the other news values are prominence. So in the news world, if something's happening to somebody who's really important or well known, that tends to be more newsworthy than if it happens to me. So if I get a dog, nobody cares. But if Lady Gaga gets a dog, you see articles about it. I love Lady Gaga. No, but she's prominent. So if there are situations in which in your industry, somebody who's well known is doing something relevant, suddenly that becomes more interesting to people. And then oddity is a really fun one, which literally, this could actually apply to pretty much any of these other ones, but is it unusual? There is inherent newsworthiness, and if something is not the typical thing, if it's not the norm. So in any situation, if you're, running an analysis or looking at a way a certain brand did something or whatever it is, if it's different from the norm, it is newsworthy and can be very interesting to people. So again, there's more news values in this. We could talk all about that another time, but I want to focus on the top three because I think that the most important and the most applicable for our purposes in earning links. So timeliness. Like I mentioned, everybody kind of thinks of this as breaking news or, whatever, like terrible local news, puns and all that is included. But we're not talking about breaking news because I don't have the resources. I don't have live journalists in the world ready to talk about things that are happening right now. Plus, not only do most of us not have those resources, but like people are doing that already. And people already trust the people who are doing that already. Like, why would they listen to us? So we're not talking about breaking news. Instead, we're talking about taking current newsworthy or timely topics and complementing them. So this example of 10 plant-based recipes for a big Thanksgiving table. This is when you see Stacker Studio here. Stacker is a newswire, and Stacker Studios are partnerships with brands. So we created this story in partnership with a brand, and we sent it out through our newswire. And this story got picked up 455 times. So we got 455 do follow links from it, which blew my mind. That number, I tell people when they watch my presentations, I'm like, don't go back to your company, or don't expect your employees to be earning 400 links per story. But, the object of this story was to not create, this wasn't like the first time anybody, these plant-based recipes weren't released today. It's more that Thanksgiving's coming up, and what can be anxiety inducing for people is like, I am vegan, I go to Thanksgiving dinner, and I don't know how to you could send this maybe to somebody whose dinner you're going to, you could use it for yourself to prepare your own meal, takes the stress out of it, but it's timely because we wrote it in advance of Thanksgiving. I'm not asking you all to break news. I'm asking you all to do something with is to track what's called news pegs. This is what I learned they use, the newsroom calls it over here at Stacker. And a news peg is essentially something that occurs regularly, like every year. It's going to be covered. Holidays are like the classic example. If you think about entertainment, it's like the Oscars or the Emmys or, whatever. The Olympics is a great one. It's not every year, but it's regularly. Anything that regularly happens, May is Mental Health Awareness Month, right? Things like that, where they're going to happen, they're still timely and they're still relevant. Those types of things are great to try to complement. Here's an example where in the headline itself, so Taylor Swift, the life story you may not know, this isn't necessarily timely, right? But the reason I put it here is because we promoted it and sent it out at a timely time. So every time if she releases an album, if something is trending on Twitter, you can take a story that you've already done, and this applies to things that you may have already created or promoted, re-promote them or time them so that suddenly if a newspaper is running a story about Taylor Swift, if like an entertainment site's running that story, a lot of the times they want your extra content to boost that story that they put out there and continue people to keep them on their site. and to link between all of their different stories. So I wanted to have this example because I think it was a little less obvious, but it was more about the timing of it. Oops.
So here's a question that comes from the chat in relation to the Thanksgiving piece, but I think you've kind of answered it with the Taylor Swift piece as well, is what kind of links did this Thanksgiving piece get? Journalists writing articles featuring specific recipes, local blogs just highlighting the piece?
A great question. And I'm really glad you asked this because this allows me to pause and back up a little bit. I didn't give you context about like where I work. So my career has been in a lot of like the digital PR or media space, but right now I work at Stacker, as you can see on this story. Stacker is a newswire. So sort of like AP or Reuters, we send stories out through a wire and publishers can choose to run those stories. Now, the difference is we give our stories away for free. So journalists usually have to pay, these news sites have to pay to access AP. All of our content's free. Like any of you right now, if you wanted to republish one of our stories in full, can do that. So we have this kind of unique earned syndication model. It's different from a lot of the other options out there. So what you're seeing here is we sent this story through our wire and 455 sites decided to republish it in full. That's going to be a little different from what other people are doing on their own. Like a single person can't be like, I'm going to build a newswire and like build relationships with we have 3,000 plus publishers in our network.
Oh, wow.
However, the reason why I use our examples is because I have a back end where I see every story that's picked up and how many times. So when I see numbers like this, I mean, it's just indicative of these are working.
Yeah.
That's how I approach it. So I give these presentations from like a digital PR and an SEO perspective because this is why we create these types of content at Stacker, is because we know that publishers want it and they are actively republishing them in full. However, I think that in the digital PR perspective, you would probably want to, you want them to link to your piece. So we can actually, like, if you have questions on that specifically, like at the end, like put them in the Q&A, we can talk at the end more about like, if there's certain like digital PR pitching tips you want. But when we're talking about the content itself, that's why I'm flagging some of these examples. Is like we can see on the back end, like, okay, this one got 450, this one got 400. Like those are really, for us, those are really high numbers. I looked at the top 500 stories we did last year, and they all had at least 200 pickups. So when you have like in the 400s, it's really high. But that's a great question, and happy to talk more about at the end if you have like more specific digital PR questions.
Okay.
So just some tips about like how to handle more timely content. If you have the budget, you can invest in something like AP Planner, which has a list of like all the events that are happening. So I mentioned AP, the Associated Press. They're kind of the behemoth in this space, right? Listing all of the different stories that usually run about those recurring news pegs that I mentioned, just so you're not like kind of doing the same thing over and over and repeating, and then brainstorming what tangential topics you can cover related to those types of topics. And searchresponse.io is a really great free tool in case you haven't checked it out. I feel like it didn't get a ton of publicity when it came out, but I found it super, super useful for brainstorming. So I just wanted to put a plug in for that really quickly. All right, so that's timeliness. Proximity. Like I mentioned, I think this is where there is a ton of opportunity. If you see a story and it's about your country, especially if it's not political, I feel like politics is a whole other ballgame here. We're not gonna talk politics, but in general, if there's a story that's like, oh, here's like the job trends in your country, it's like, that's okay, sure, I'm interested. If it's about your state, you're like, all right, that's a little more intriguing to me. If it's about your city, you're really kind of tuned in. Like, what's happening, for me in Richmond, Virginia, if I see a story specifically about Richmond, Virginia, and if it's in your neighborhood, oh my God, like that's super relevant to me and I need to read about it. And all of this is just to show that localization in general is fantastic, and the more specific you can get, the better. And a lot of the time, people tend to stay more vague and kind of take the more general approach. And I'm using David from Schitt's Creek, one of my all-time favorite shows, here to show that any localization is a really good idea. So what does that actually mean? Like in some cases, we take data sets, and instead of just like releasing the data set, we'll pose it as, okay, here are 12 of the least affordable states for renters, right? So inherently, you can tell in this headline that data was used and localized. So this earned 224 pickups and links. But then, this is the important part. So we sent this out through the wire, like this version, which we call like the national version only because anybody can run this and it would make sense, you know? But then we looked at that list and we customized the headlines based on the locations. And we resent the same, the story was pretty much the same except its headline and the intro changed. So California is the number 6 least affordable state. Vermont is the number 4 least affordable state. If you're a publisher in Vermont, which version of the story would you run? Which story would catch your eye?
Right. It would definitely be Vermont. Like I would want to know that where
and
I
you, yeah, and it just like communicates very quickly the relevance. Yeah. Whereas here you have to click on the story, see what those 12 states are. But especially if you're pitching, this is why this applies to digital PR. If you're pitching, do not send this as your pitch. Like, oh, if your subject line says 12 least affordable states, it's Vermont is the number 4 least affordable state. Then any publisher in Vermont immediately gets why this is important to them. So what we do, that added another 172 links and pickups just from taking the same data and the same story and repackaging it and directing it at those relevant states, like those publishers. You know, we have publishers in all the states. So we would resend the California one to all the publishers we have in California, but it's so much less work for us. You're not creating a whole new story for each of those places. You're taking a national data set that breaks things down by state and you're repackaging and repitching. And this, I think, can be so critical for link earning. So think about these things, especially if your target audience resides in a specific location. You should definitely already be doing this. You can still do the national version just to earn the links, but then you can take a national story and add the local context. And suddenly it's like fascinating to people who live in a certain place to see how they compare to everywhere else. Data is kind of like the key here. It makes this so much easier because a lot of free public data sets are already comprehensive enough that they break things down by state is the most common, but often you'll find zip and zip codes even better in a lot of cases. And then customizing the angle, customizing the pitch per location. And people tend to overlook more local publications because they're not as flashy. We don't know their names off the top of our heads. Like I'm from the Fort Lauderdale area and we have the Sun Sentinel, right? Like you don't think the Sun Sentinel when you think about like, oh, what sexy places do I want to get links from? But they are just as authoritative. You know, not all of them, but a lot of them are authoritative. They're trusted by their communities. The links are great. And you're still building a lot of authority with the people who are reading it and with, you know, with really anybody seeing that a legitimate news organization is deciding to write about what you wrote about. So before we get into the last newsworthy element that I'm going to talk about, I want to know what your biggest barrier to earning links is. You know, we have some options here. I'm sure there are more because this is hard. But it would help me, I think, also like to frame maybe the Q&A at the end of knowing exactly what people are struggling with the most. And for some, it might be all of them, because let's be honest, especially depending on where you work, you know, yeah.
All link building is
all the things.
All right, give us a second. We'll get that poll up. There we go. So biggest barriers, is it lack of budget, lack of resources to create and promote the content, or lack of buy-in? Again, all of the above.
What? No, this is so easy.
Yeah, I think, like I said, just coming from that nonprofit world, oh, we're not seeing the poll. All right, that is good to know. Let's see what's going on.
Okay.
Okay,
I think it was
perfect.
just delayed. Yeah.
It was just a little delayed. All right, great. Yeah, I know for me, like I said, that nonprofit world, you're like, but I have no money. And I wear 40 hats, so I have no time.
Yeah, time. That's what we didn't put in here. I was just like, the time to figure this out.
Yeah.
And it's so true. These are three common ones, but they're by no means all of them.
Melissa says a lack of experienced content creators. All right, so here's the final results. 26% of people said a lack of budget, 56% said a lack of resources, and 18% said a lack of buy-in.
So not like a clear runaway winner, but lack of
No.
resources makes a lot of sense to me, because if you're doing this yourself, it is a lot of work. And one thing I mentioned, I don't even remember who I mentioned this to recently, but it is very rare to find somebody who can create data, like do the data analysis, create the content, design it, and promote it. It's like, that does not exist. Those people, if you find somebody who can, hire them immediately.
Yep.
But it is just not typically how skill sets shake out, right? So
Right.
we're talking about it is a lot of resources, whether it's manpower or money or whatever it is. But thank you all for sharing that, and we can talk about specific problems at the end as well. So, impact. If something happens to one person, it might not be a huge story. In this case, if a cat sneaks in through your screen door and into your house, right? Like, that's just cute. But it wouldn't necessarily make the news. Now, if it happens to a lot of people, if all of a sudden, 7 people in your neighborhood report that cats broke into their houses last night, that becomes pretty newsworthy. It's like, what's happening with the cats around here? And I just use that as an example when people talk about impact. I want you to think about like the way that journalists think about it. If it's happening to a lot of people, it just matters more, right? So let's look at some examples of that. US airlines are cutting flights ahead of the 2022 holiday season. Again, these are stories we create on behalf of clients, brands that we work with. And we do this story. Think about how many people this impacts. Okay.
Yeah.
Anybody flying during the holidays, that's a lot of people. So the impact, like if you're thinking about newsworthiness, you're thinking the impact on this is huge. I mean, think about the freaking Southwest debacle.
Oh, yeah. That's exactly where my mind went.
And I was on one of those Southwest flights.
No.
It wasn't nearly as bad as it could have been because we didn't check our bags. But even like so many people were affected by that directly, and anybody else knew somebody who was. It was fascinated with like the breakdown of a freaking airline, right? So like anybody who travels, even if you're not traveling in the 22 holiday season, you're probably interested in like what's happening with air travel right now.
Or you're waiting on someone. Yeah.
Exactly. Yes, the impact is significant. So it wasn't surprising at all to me that this was one of our like really top performing stories. Similarly, how movie ticket prices and sales have fluctuated over time. People who go to the movies, like we're really writing down categories here of massive groups of people. Like we're not talking about, a person who's looking for, pet insurance that is in this price bracket in this state. Like that is a very niche group of people.
Very.
And by all means, please do serve them if you're a pet insurance company, but that's your bottom of the funnel content. We're talking top of the funnel content to earn links. These are the types, like aim for this level of impact of, is this a story that's having widespread effect on people in the country that you're in, or even the world in a lot of cases. So tangential content is really crucial here. And I like to give this example. It's like, if you work at a company or, a B2B or a SaaS company that has to do with employee communications, let's say, for example, you can talk about employee communications, right? But I would recommend that you zoom out first. So that's what this next level is. Zooming out. Okay, employee comms company. It's really about company culture and maybe productivity. If I were to zoom out and think about what topics am I like lingering in? Culture, so like how people communicate at work, and productivity, like how efficient are they in getting things done based on how they're communicating at work. Okay, so you've zoomed out, then you zoom back in. So for culture, there are things like transparency at work, there's friendships and even dating at work. I've seen pieces like that kill it. There's remote work, which also falls under the productivity bucket. And obviously there's been a ton of stories on that. There's time tracking and whether that's an appropriate thing. There's the topic of 4-day work weeks. I do this to demonstrate that you work at an employee communications company, but that's not all you should talk about to earn links. If you do the zoom out and zoom in exercise, you suddenly unlocked a ton of other topics that still make sense for you to talk about. If you're talking about pet insurance, some eyebrows would be raised of like, what's happening here? But if you're talking about, remote work in your employee communications company, nobody would be weirded out by that, because there's still topics of interest to your audience and also a more general audience. So this is kind of like the exercise that I recommend people go through. This is kind of an abrupt transition, but if you're watching this presentation, you're like, okay, cool, but then what do I do? I have this great content, and now I have to earn the links. I was trying to find the right GIF for this, and I pulled one from Community because that's another great show. It's just like, I don't know what to do. My whole brain is crying. I feel like the first half of this process is half the battle. Like creating the content is really hard. And then the second half, like you're done and you feel accomplished and proud, and you should. Because even if you just publish that, great job. Right. But if you're trying to earn links, you have the whole second half of this process, which is securing the coverage. So I just want to acknowledge, like, take a break, for a little bit after you do the first part of this. And I can provide some actionable tips, but I want to do a little bit of framing here. And this became really obvious to me at Stacker. Even in the past, when I worked at agencies that did digital PR, a lot of it is about like, think about the person you're pitching. Okay. There's a human being at the other side of a pitch. What I learned at Stacker is to think about the publication as well and their objectives. So like I mentioned, we're a newswire and people choose to run our stories. Why are they running our stories? We're not paying them to. What are they getting out of that? So what I have here is an example of a quote from one of our publishers in our network, the Auburn Examiner. And what they're essentially saying is that Stacker content has been extremely useful for them to drive traffic to their site and bolster other really important stories that they are reporting on themselves. So a lot of these publishers, they're like, we have these great stories that we're working on and they're super important to us. And you're helping us by freeing up resources to like focus on that. And you can supply the stories that are driving a lot of traffic that you can link to maybe these more timely or more, maybe it's leading to a lot of subscribers to their sites or increasing engagement. But thinking about what the publisher's goals are even is an exercise I don't think a lot of people go through, especially as SEOs. Like, we're over here doing a million other things, from technical to like it. To take this a second before you start thinking about how am I going to build links and think about who you're pitching and what they're trying to achieve, it'll help you even in content ideation, really, but especially in promotions and pitching and trying to get them to talk about you. It's like, how is what you're talking about going to help them? And it hopefully puts you in the right frame of mind. So quick, again, this could be a whole separate presentation, but what I want to say quickly is personalize a pitch email that you're sending out. So if you do a story about the 4-day work week, don't send the same pitch to 40 people and cross your fingers and hope for the best. We are way past that era of earning links. And you probably know, because if you're like me, you receive these pitches and they're terrible. And I hate them with a burning passion. And by personalize it, I mean, know what they write about, like follow them on socials, maybe even interact with them before you pitch them, but at least in the pitch show that you are familiar with what they write about and that you have a good sense of what their readers would be interested in. Similarly, position it based on what they want and need and not what you want and need. I get a lot of emails that are just like, yeah, I would really love to get a link from you. I would really love to write on your site. People pitch me to write on Stacker, even though we don't do guest posts. Again, bad pitching. I didn't do the bare minimum research. But I don't really care. I know it sounds cool, but I don't really care what you want. I don't know who you are. You're a stranger to me. So if somebody pitched me and they're like, say we did accept guest posts and they showed me a really interesting statistic and that they're like, I can tell based on the content that you've already published that this like is in line with that and could be really interesting to your audience. That's very different from like the first line being, I want to write for you. Like, okay, great. And then finally, keeping it short and to the point. Nobody has a lot of time, including us. You know, you don't need to ramble on about all the different things. It's saying, here's why this is interesting. Here's why it's interesting to you. Here's where the content is. Let me know if you have any questions, you know, like whatever the call to action is, like, are you interested? That sort of thing. The good thing about newsworthy content is that it tends to do really well, not just for digital PR like we're talking about, or syndication like we have at Stacker, but you're able to repurpose it and use it for all of your other channels. So even if you're specifically SEO, you can make any other marketing department or content department or PR department you work with happy by then giving it this content to them and saying, hey, you can use this in your email campaigns. Hey, you can use this on social media, and creating a little bit more kind of camaraderie between different teams, or vice versa. Maybe like your content team came up with something awesome and you're able to secure links for that. Like thinking about that is great for buy-in as well. Right. The more teams you can get excited about a piece of content for different purposes, the more likely you are to get buy-in at your organization. I just talked a lot, but I would love to answer any questions people have.
We do have a couple. So Amanda wanted to know, do lists typically perform or get picked up by new media outlets more than general content?
Ooh, great question. I don't know. I can't comfortably say like they're picked up more because I just don't have that data in front of me. Mm-hmm. They absolutely work, asterisk. The caveat is, I actually just gave a different presentation about this. Lists do very well for us, actually, but they have to be based on data. So not like the BuzzFeed lists of the past where it's like 15, shows that made me sub on a whatever.
Yes.
Like those are fun, but that's not really what you can pitch and get coverage for as a brand. We have a lot of success with data-based lists and rankings so that they're objective and a reporter sees that and knows exactly where it came from and that it's credible. That gets you, like I mentioned, they don't know who you are. So there's a lot of, you have to bridge a lot of trust there. You have to build it very quickly. You don't have like a whole conversation to have with somebody to get them to like you. So if the topic of your content is, oh, we looked at census data and found these are the top 10 cities that blah, blah, blah. Oh, it's census data. I can trust that.
Right.
Immediately, you've established that what you've created does not need to be thoroughly analyzed to make sure that it's legit. So yes, that's the short answer. Yes, they work very well, but I just want to add that caveat because that's the only way it's worked really well for us. It's a great question.
It is a great question. All right, here's another one. Oh, jumping around, give me a moment. Does your content approach work for smaller sized B2B companies?
Absolutely. I mean, we work with a lot of B2B companies. Size only, like if it doesn't matter if you're a small company for this to work. It's just creating and promoting the content. Like if you're a small company, you might not have the resources as we talked about earlier. But that's why a lot of them like hire us or agencies or freelancers or whatever they do to kind of help them, at least with a portion of this process. But I have gotten this question a lot throughout my career. It's like, oh, if I'm a smaller brand, even not by size, but by like recognition, I'm newer. there's a hesitancy. And yeah, I'm not going to pretend that if you're, you know, Wayfair, I'm like looking at my furniture that we just bought, that if you're Wayfair or Target or Petco or whatever, I keep thinking of retail, but you know, any of Salesforce, they obviously are really well known, and they have a shorter bridge to cross in terms of trust. Let me put it that way. So it's easier for them. So you might have a bigger bridge to cross to build trust with reporters, which is why it's even more important that your methodology is really sound. We use data all the time at Stacker, or really manual research. Like, thankfully, we're able to use more manual research because our publications trust us. They're in our network. But if you've never pitched anything before, using data is the way to go, so that you can bridge that trust easier. And then it doesn't really matter. If you have a really interesting story based on a legitimate source, it doesn't really matter that you're a small brand. That's how you start building up your brand recognition. So it is a bit of like, it does compound, but it's certainly possible and it does work.
I like that a lot. All right. Here's a little bit of a longer question. Stay with me. When you develop a newsworthy piece of content, how do you recommend proceeding as a brand? Would you pitch to journalists? Hey, check this out. You may like it. Or do you pitch with a, hey, you're welcome to republish this? Or would you like to reference this piece? What are you actually looking for journalists to do with your content?
Okay. So there are different options here. I don't think there's one correct way. If it's a publication that is more niche to you, like if you do a report or something and it's more niche and you really want to make a partnership with a publication that's like relevant to your industry, as an example, you could try to set up a syndication partnership with them and say like, hey, you know, we create content that's really in line with what you're doing, and it's based on data that we say you're able to use, like internal data or something that nobody has access to. They might be pleased to have a syndication partnership where they run your content for free, and you can try to establish a relationship there. If you're trying to strictly earn a link or links by pitching this, I think it's less like, hey, check it out, let me know. Like a little, not that casual, I would say, only because if you're that casual about it, I feel like they'll kind of be casual about it and be like, oh, okay, you know, maybe this isn't going to be that interesting to me. I think that if you're pitching various people, one of the things that digital PR folks do often is like pitch things as an exclusive. So they'll say, okay, who's the best publisher that I want to cover this? You can pitch it to them and say, hey, this new, especially if it's data-based, you can say it's a report, a study, a survey. We just did this new study survey report, and we want to offer it to you exclusively, meaning they'll be the first ones to publish it and you won't pitch it elsewhere. Nobody else will publish it before them. That adds an urgency and also signals to them that you think it's best for them and that you're really excited for them to publish it and you're giving them this opportunity. So I think that's an approach to take. For everybody else you're pitching, I think it's more, you still have to customize the pitch and you say like, I think that your audiences will find this really interesting. So it's less like, if we're talking about the tone of the email, I think it's less like the press release approach, which is just like, this is here, and more like, I did my research. You're not literally saying this, but like the mentality is, I did my research and I know that you write about this type of stuff and your audience is interested in this type of stuff, because people are inundated with emails now. Anything that's anywhere far from this is really good for you specifically, it's just not likely to get not even read, let alone acted upon. There's some ridiculous stat right now that's like, I don't know, journalists look at 3% of the emails that they get, or like something like pitches that they get or something. I don't know, might be misquoting that completely, but it's tough. I'm not going to sugarcoat that. So for the pitching, I mean, that's why when Stacker approached me and they're like, we don't pitch, we just have a network, I was like, oh thank God. Because pitching is tough.
It is.
But that is my advice. If that's what you were getting at. If not, feel free to ask a follow-up and I can try to answer it better.
We are a little bit over time, so I am going to wrap this up. There are still a couple great questions, and I believe in the beginning you said to find you on LinkedIn, correct?
Yes, find me on LinkedIn. I'll also, here's my email. Either on LinkedIn or email, just drop the exact question and I'll be happy to answer it.
Excellent. You are so awesome. And I believe you also have a page of some other places to dive in.
Yes, you are absolutely right. So I mentioned briefly that we had done a report that I have access to like every story we've sent out and how many times they're picked up. I distilled all of those insights into the What Publishers Want report. So when you get the deck and you click on this link, you can download that report for free. It goes more in depth about all the trends that I saw in 2022. I talked about news values briefly. I did a post about all of those called News Values and Why They Matter. Check that out. And then also kind of more of the topic about like link building versus link earning. That we have a great post on the site about that too. So I think these are the most relevant follow-up resources that can be helpful.
I love it. Those are great. Thank you so much. On behalf of Lumar, I do want to thank you so much for being here, for sharing all this great link building information with us. I also do want to mention we do have an upcoming webinar here soon on accessibility. Please join us for that. We are bravely stepping into the accessibility area, and it's just excellent, and I can't wait to see more about it. And also, if you would like a demo with Lumar, we can set that up, a personalized demo. So please, of course, let us know as well. Thank you all so much for coming. Amanda, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. This was so much fun. And thank you all for joining.
Of course. Well, have a nice day, everyone. We will see you at the next webinar.